The sound of boots hitting wet asphalt echoed through the narrow alleyway, a rhythmic thud against the distant hum of city traffic. It was 03 hours. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and the faint acrid scent of industrial exhaust drifting from the manufacturing district. The man walking wore a dark jacket, unremarkable, blended into the shadows. He carried a worn canvas bag over one shoulder. His name was Elias, and until 4 hours ago he had been patching up training accidents at the base. He was an army medic, trained to see trauma and respond with calculated efficiency. He had seen the worst humanity could inflict on itself in foreign deserts, and he had learned to lock those memories away in a tight compartment in his mind. Tonight, he was just a tired man walking home through a shortcut he knew he shouldn't take. The streetlights here were broken, shooting intermittent sparks that illuminated the graffiti-covered walls for fractions of a second before plunging everything back into near-total darkness. He adjusted the strap on his bag, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. All he wanted was the silence of his apartment and 5 hours of sleep before his next shift. His training, however, never truly slept. His eyes constantly scanned the periphery, noting the deep doorways and the spaces behind overflowing dumpsters. It was muscle memory. You check your sectors, even when you're just walking to get milk. He didn't expect trouble, but he was always prepared for its possibility. That was the rule that kept you alive. He was passing the mouth of an intersecting alley, narrower than the one he was on, little more than a service corridor between two derelict warehouses. That was when he heard it. It wasn't a shout. It was a gasp, strangled and desperate, followed by the scuff of leather soles slipping on slick pavement. Elias stopped instantly. He didn't freeze. He paused, putting his back against the brick wall of the nearest building, melting into the shadow. He held his breath, tilting his head slightly to amplify the sound. Silence returned for 3 seconds. Then another sound. A sob choked back, and a voice, thin and trembling, whispering something indistinguishable to the empty air. It sounded like panic in its purest form. Elias could have kept walking. It wasn't his sector. It wasn't his problem. The city police had patrols for this. But the sound hadn't just been fear. It had been the sound of someone who knew they were completely alone. The medic in him, the part that responded to vulnerability before logic could intervene, made the decision. He pushed off the wall and turned into the narrow alley, his movements silent. His weight shifted forward on the balls of his feet, ready to react. The alley was a dead end, terminating in a high chain-link fence topped with razor wire 20 yards down. In the meager light filtering in from the main street, Elias saw a figure huddled behind a stack of discarded wooden pallets near the fence. It was a man. He was curled tight, knees drawn up, his head snapping back over his shoulder every 2 seconds to look at the entrance of the alley where Elias now stood. As Elias stepped closer, the figure flinched violently, scrambling backward on hands and knees like a trapped animal, kicking over an empty metal can that clattered loudly in the confined space. Elias raised his hands slowly, palms open, showing he held no weapon. He stopped 10 feet away, maintaining a safe distance, giving the man space. The man was old. In the dim light, his hair looked white and disheveled, plastered to his forehead with sweat despite the cool night air. He was wearing a wrinkled trench coat over a suit that had once been expensive but was now dirty and torn at the shoulder. His chest was heaving. You could hear the wheezing rattle in his lungs from 10 feet away. He was vibrating with terror. His eyes were wide, showing too much white around the irises, darting from Elias to the shadows behind him, then back to Elias. He wasn't looking at Elias. He was looking through him, expecting something terrible to emerge from the darkness. Elias kept his voice low, flat, and calm, the voice he used when approaching a soldier in shock. "Sir, I'm a medic. You're hyperventilating. I need you to try and slow your breathing." The old man didn't seem to process the words. He just kept staring, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. He pointed a shaking finger toward the street Elias had just come from. "Did you see them?" The voice was a harsh whisper, cracking with strain. "Did they follow you in?" Elias didn't look back. He kept his focus entirely on the man. "Nobody is here but me. You're safe right now. Are you injured? Did someone hurt you?" The old man shook his head frantically, a jerky, spasmodic motion. "Not yet. Not yet. But they will. They don't stop. They never stop." He tried to stand up using the pallets for support, but his legs gave out, and he slid back down to the pavement with a groan of frustration and fear. Elias moved in closer, dropping to one knee beside the man. Up close, the situation was worse. The old man's skin was grey and clammy. His pupils were dilated. His heart was visibly pounding against his thin chest beneath the torn shirt. This wasn't just anxiety. This was a physiological crisis brought on by extreme, prolonged terror. His body was failing under the strain. Elias reached out slowly and placed a hand on the man's forearm. The skin was ice cold. The man grabbed Elias's wrist instantly. His grip was shockingly strong, the desperate, clawing grip of a drowning man clutching a lifeline. His fingernails dug into Elias's skin. "You have to listen," the old man hissed, pulling Elias closer, his breath sour with fear. "For you look like you can handle yourself. Are you police?" Elias shook his head slightly. "Army. Medic." The old man's eyes widened further, a flicker of hope mixing with the terror. "Army. Good, good. You understand orders. You understand duty." He was rambling, his eyes losing focus again. He released Elias's wrist with one hand and began fumbling wildly inside his trench coat, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't undo the buttons. He ripped one button off in his haste. He reached into an interior pocket, his breath catching in his throat in sharp, painful gasps. He pulled something out. It was a small, thick manila envelope, sealed tightly with heavy tape, folded in half to fit the pocket. It looked old, worn at the edges from being carried for days, maybe weeks. He shoved it toward Elias, pressing it against the medic's chest. "Take it, hide it. Don't let them see it on you." Elias didn't take it immediately. He looked at the envelope, then back at the man's desperate face. "Sir, what is this? Who is chasing you? We need to get you to a hospital. Your heart rate is too high." The old man gripped the front of Elias's jacket, yanking him forward, his face inches away. The desperation in his eyes was absolute. This was a man who knew he had no time left. "No hospitals," he choked out. "They have eyes there. They have eyes everywhere. You don't understand the scope of it. The corruption. It's in the foundation." He paused, gulping air, fighting to speak clearly. He looked deep into Elias's eyes, searching for something. Strength, integrity, desperation. He seemed to find it. His voice dropped to a barely audible murmur, forcing Elias to lean his ear almost to the old man's lips. "I was the accountant for 30 years. I thought I was just moving numbers, hiding profits." Tears began to spill out of the old man's eyes, mixing with the sweat on his grimy face. A look of profound, crushing guilt washed over him, replacing the panic for a brief moment. Then I saw the new accounts, the shipping manifests. It wasn't just money anymore. It was flesh, human cargo. Elias felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He went very still. The old man continued, his words spilling out faster now, as if he knew the mechanism of his body was shutting down. "They are bringing a shipment tonight, right now, at the old docks, Pier 42, the abandoned fish processing plant." The old man's grip tightened painfully on Elias's jacket. 80 people, women, children, packed into containers like sardines. The police, the captain of the precinct. He's on the payroll. He pulled the patrols away from the docks tonight. Nobody is going to stop them. Nobody knows except me. The old man's breath hitched violently. His eyes rolled back slightly, then snapped back to focus on Elias with tremendous effort. He pressed the envelope into Elias's hand again. "The proof is in here, the ledgers, the names, the bank accounts of the politicians and the cops who protect them. All of it." The old man's strength began to fade rapidly. His grip on Elias's jacket loosened. He slumped back against the pallets, his breathing becoming shallow and irregular. He looked up at the sliver of dark sky visible between the warehouse roofs. A strange calm settled over his features, the calm of finality. He looked back at Elias one last time. The terror was gone, replaced by a heavy, somber directive. "I ran because I couldn't live with it anymore. I tried to get to the feds, but they intercepted me. They've been hunting me for 3 days. He coughed, a wet, weak sound. "They will be at Pier 42 in less than an hour to unload. If those containers move inland, those people are gone forever." His voice faded to a whisper. "I'm done. My heart, it can't take it." He closed his eyes. His last words were barely an exhale, spoken directly to the soul of the soldier kneeling before him. "Don't let them get away with it. You're the only one who knows now. Finish it." The old man's head lolled to the side. His chest hitched one last time, and then went still. Elias didn't move for a long moment. He stayed kneeling on the dirty pavement of the alley, the dead weight of the old man's hand slipping off his arm. He looked at the manila envelope in his hand. It felt heavy. He looked at the man's face, now slack and empty of fear, Elias checked for a pulse at the carotid artery, mechanically going through the motions, though he knew what he would find. There was nothing. The man was gone. The silence in the alley felt different now. It wasn't empty silence. It was loaded with the weight of the information just transferred. Pier 42. 80 lives. Police complicity. An hour left. Elias slowly stood up. His exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The adrenaline that flooded his system wasn't the jittery kind. It was the focused, icy calm of a soldier entering a combat zone. He looked down at the envelope. He tucked it securely inside his jacket, feeling the stiff paper against his ribs. He looked back towards the entrance of the alley. The city noises out there sounded different now. They weren't background noise. They were the sounds of a battlefield. He reached up and tightened the strap of his canvas bag. He had medical supplies in there. Tourniquets, bandages, morphine, tools for saving lives. But he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that tonight wasn't about saving lives. Not in the way he was used to. Tonight was about stopping the people who destroyed them. He looked at his watch. 03:12. 48 minutes until the timeline the old man gave him. He wasn't going home to sleep. He turned away from the street that led to his apartment and began walking in the opposite direction, deeper into the industrial district, toward the river, toward Pier 42. The transformation was internal, immediate, and complete. The tired medic who just wanted a bed was gone. In his place was something else entirely, something forged in discipline and awakened by a dying man's plea. He moved with purpose now, hugging the shadows, his eyes scanning not just for threats to himself, but for targets. The city had a new predator tonight. Elias moved away from the alley, blending into the deeper shadows of the industrial district. The transition in his mindset was absolute. The fatigue that had plagued him 10 minutes ago was suppressed by a surge of cortisol and adrenaline, a chemical cocktail he had lived on for years during his tours. He wasn't tired anymore. He was operational. He kept the canvas bag close to his body to stop the buckles from jingling. The streets here were wider, lined with windowless factories and depots surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire. The air got heavier, wetter, smelling of stagnant river water and diesel fumes. He didn't run. Running attracted attention. He walked with a brisk, purposeful stride, the walk of a man who belongs exactly where he is. As he neared the riverfront, the streetlights became scarce. The fog rolling off the water obscured visibility, reducing the world to shades of grey and black. It was perfect cover. He approached the perimeter of the old shipping yards. Pier 42 was technically condemned, a relic of a time when the city was a manufacturing hub. Now it was a rust-bucket maze of rotting wood and corrugated metal. Elias stopped 50 yards from the main gate, crouching behind a concrete barrier. He needed to assess the tactical situation. He narrowed his eyes, peering through the mist. The main gate was chained shut, but the chain looked new, the padlock gleaming under the single working floodlight. Beyond the gate, in the courtyard of the abandoned fish processing plant, he saw vehicles. They weren't hiding. There were 3 black SUVs, engines idling, exhaust pluming into the cold air, and flanked on either side of them were 2 police cruisers. The lights on the cruisers were off, but the silhouette was unmistakable. The old man hadn't lied. The corruption was right there in the open. Law enforcement wasn't coming to help. They were the security detail for the crime. Elias counted the hostiles visible from his position. 2 uniformed officers leaning against the hood of a cruiser, smoking. They looked relaxed, laughing. 3 men in suits standing near the SUVs. 2 more men, dressed in tactical gear but clearly private military contractors or mercenaries, were patrolling the perimeter of the main warehouse doors. 7 visible targets. There would be more inside. Elias looked at his own inventory. He had no firearm. He had a folding knife in his pocket, 3 inches of steel useless against body armor or distance. In his medical bag, he had trauma shears, a heavy flashlight, a tourniquet, bandages, and a few vials of morphine. He wasn't equipped for a firefight. He had to turn this into a ghost story. He had to be the thing in the dark that they couldn't see until it was too late. He backed away from the main gate and moved east, following the fence line until it met the river. The fence extended out into the water, but the bottom corner had been eroded by rust and tide. It was a tight squeeze. Elias dropped to his stomach in the mud. The cold wetness soaked through his jacket instantly, freezing against his skin. He didn't flinch. He crawled under the jagged metal, pulling his bag after him. ignoring the scrape of rust against his back. He was inside the perimeter. He moved low, utilizing the cover of stacked shipping crates and rusted machinery. The sound of the river lapping against the pilings masked the sound of his boots on the gravel. He worked his way toward the main building, the processing plant. It was a massive structure, 3 stories high, with shattered windows near the roofline. The ground level was a series of loading docks. He could hear voices now, harsh, commanding tones echoing from the open bay doors. He needed a better vantage point. He spotted a metal maintenance ladder bolted to the side of a silo adjacent to the warehouse. He climbed it, careful not to let his boots clang against the rungs. From the top of the silo, he could look down through the dirty skylights of the warehouse. He wiped the grime away with his sleeve and looked inside. The interior was cavernous, lit by portable halogen work lights that cast long, stark shadows. The space was dominated by old conveyor belts and gutting tables, but the center of the floor had been cleared. There, sitting in the middle of the concrete expanse, was a 40-foot shipping container, rust-red, sealed. Standing around it were 10 more men. He saw the captain, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a police uniform, his hat tucked under his arm, shaking hands with a man in a grey suit who looked like he belonged in a corporate boardroom, not a derelict pier. The man in the suit handed the captain a thick briefcase, the payoff. Elias watched the captain open it, check the contents, and smile. It was a smile of pure greed, devoid of any morality. But then, Elias saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the mercenaries walked up to the side of the shipping container and banged on the metal with the butt of his rifle. "Quiet in there!" he shouted. The sound reverberated through the warehouse. In response, a faint collective sound rose up from inside the metal box. It wasn't screaming. It was worse. It was a low, muffled weeping, the sound of dozens of people, terrified, huddled together in the dark, lacking air, lacking hope. The old man said 80 people. 80 souls packed into a steel box like cattle. Elias felt a rage burn in his chest, hot and sharp. This wasn't just a crime. It was an atrocity, and the people sworn to prevent it were profiting from it. He checked his watch. 03:45. The trucks to move the container would be here soon. He had to act. He couldn't fight 20 men head-on. He needed to divide and conquer. He needed to create chaos. He climbed back down the ladder, his movements faster now. He reached the ground and scanned the area. He needed a weapon and he needed a distraction. He saw a breaker box on the exterior wall of the warehouse, the heavy industrial kind. He moved to it, using his trauma shears to pry the rusted latch open. Inside were the main fuses for the external lights. He didn't pull them yet. That would be his opening act. First, he needed to thin the herd. He saw one of the mercenaries detach from the group at the loading dock, walking toward the side of the building where Elias was hiding. The man was unzipping his pants, looking for a spot to relieve himself. He was coming right for Elias's position. Elias pressed himself flat against the dark, corrugated metal of the wall. He held his breath. The mercenary walked past him, 5 feet away, oblivious. He stopped by a pile of old tires, his back to Elias. Elias moved. He didn't run. He lunged, covering the distance in 2 silent strides. He wrapped his left arm around the man's throat, cutting off the carotid arteries in a sleeper hold, while his right hand clamped over the man's mouth to stifle any sound. The mercenary thrashed, his hands clawing at Elias's arm, but Elias had the leverage. He dropped his weight, dragging the man backward into the shadows. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The man's struggles weakened. 15 seconds. He went limp. Elias held him for another 5 seconds to be sure, then lowered him gently to the ground. He didn't kill him. He just took him out of the equation. He quickly searched the unconscious man. He found a radio, a combat knife, and a 9mm pistol with 2 spare magazines. Elias took them. He checked the chamber of the pistol, loaded. He had a weapon now, but a gun was loud. A gun changed the dynamic from ghost to shootout. He holstered the pistol. It was Plan B. Plan A was still psychological warfare. He took the man's radio and turned the volume up to max, then tossed it into a metal dumpster on the far side of the alley, 20 yards away. Then he moved back to the breaker box. He waited. Inside the warehouse, the transaction was concluding. The captain was shaking hands with the suit again. "Get the truck in here," the captain shouted. "Let's load up and clear out." That was the cue. Elias reached into the breaker box and ripped the main fuse block out. Sparks showered down, hissing in the damp air. Instantly, the floodlights in the courtyard died. The exterior of the warehouse plunged into total darkness. At the same moment, the radio Elias had thrown into the dumpster crackled to life with static and chatter from the other guards. The sudden noise in the metal dumpster sounded like someone crashing around. "What was that?" a voice shouted from the loading dock. "Over by the dumpsters, check it out." Elias watched as two mercenaries and one of the cops drew their weapons and moved cautiously toward the noise, away from the warehouse entrance. The herd was thinning. Elias moved in the opposite direction, slipping through the side door the mercenary had left slightly ajar. He was inside the warehouse now. The noise of the machinery and the echo of the space worked in his favor. He stayed in the shadows of the high shelving units, moving parallel to the main floor. He was 30 feet away from the captain and the suit. He could see the container clearly now. He could see the condensation on the metal sides from the body heat and breath of the people inside. They were suffocating. He had to get that door open, but there were still 7 hostiles guarding the immediate area. Elias saw a forklift parked near the edge of the open floor. It had a propane tank strapped to the back. A plan formed in his mind. Dangerous, volatile, but necessary. He crept toward the forklift, keeping low. He needed to get there without being seen by the men standing in the center of the illuminated circle. He timed his movements with the sweep of the few remaining interior lights. He reached the forklift. He could smell the propane. He quietly reached up and twisted the valve on the tank, opening it fully. The gas hissed out, a sharp, distinct sound. "Hey!" one of the guards shouted, spinning around. "Who's there?" Elias didn't answer. He backed away, disappearing into the dark aisles of shelving. "Leak! We got a gas leak!" the guard yelled, running toward the forklift. The captain turned, annoyed. "Fix it, you idiot! Don't let it blow!" 3 men moved toward the forklift. Perfect. They were bunched up. Elias pulled the pistol he had taken. He wasn't aiming at the men. He aimed at a heavy steel chain hanging from the overhead crane, directly above a stack of empty metal barrels near the forklift. He exhaled, steadying his aim. He squeezed the trigger. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet sparked off the chain, but the sound did the job. Panic erupted. "Sniper!" someone screamed. The men near the forklift dove for cover. The captain drew his weapon, spinning in circles. "Where is he? I want eyes on him." In the confusion, Elias moved. He didn't retreat, he advanced. He sprinted low through the shadows, flanking them. He wasn't trying to escape. He was hunting. He came up behind one of the suited men who had taken cover behind a pillar. Elias pistol-whipped him, a sharp, controlled strike to the temple. The man dropped without a sound. Elias stepped over him. He was 20 feet from the container. He saw the locking mechanism. It was a heavy iron bar. He needed 2 seconds to open it, but the captain was standing right in front of it, gun raised, looking terrified and furious. "Show yourself!" the captain screamed at the darkness. "I know you're alone. Come out and die." Elias stayed behind a crate. He saw the fear in the captain's eyes. The man was a bully, used to having the badge protect him. He wasn't ready for a war. Elias picked up a heavy bolt from the floor and threw it against the far wall. Clang! The captain spun toward the sound, firing 2 shots wildly. Elias stepped out from his cover. He didn't shout. He didn't make a speech. He raised the pistol and fired 1 shot. It wasn't a kill shot. He hit the captain in the right shoulder, the side holding the gun. The captain screamed, dropping his weapon, spinning around from the impact and falling to his knees. The other guards shouted, turning their weapons toward Elias. But he was already moving, sliding across the floor to the cover of the container itself. Bullets sparked against the concrete where he had been standing a fraction of a second before. He was pinned down. He was outnumbered, but he was right where he needed to be. He was at the door of the container. He could hear the people inside screaming now, terrified by the gunfire. Elias reached up, holstering his gun for a second, and grabbed the heavy locking lever of the container. It was rusted stiff. He gritted his teeth, putting every ounce of his strength into it. "Cover me!" He didn't know who he was talking to. Maybe God, maybe the universe. Bullets pinged off the metal of the container inches from his head. He roared with effort and yanked the lever up. The seal broke with a pressurized hiss. He swung the heavy doors open. The light from the warehouse flooded into the container, and for a second, everything stopped. The guards stopped firing. The captain stopped screaming. Elias froze. Inside, huddled in the filth, were dozens of faces, women clutching babies, old men, teenagers. They looked out at the scene of violence with wide, blinded eyes. They were the cargo, and seeing them, right there, changed everything. It wasn't a tactical mission anymore. It was a holy war. Elias grabbed the metal door and used it as a shield, peeking out at the mercenaries. "Anyone who fires into this container," Elias's voice boomed out, loud and terrifyingly calm, echoing through the warehouse, "dies today. I promise you that." The silence hung for a heartbeat. Then the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Not the corrupt local cops. This was different. Fire trucks? Or maybe the backup the captain had called. It didn't matter. The standoff had begun. Elias was the only thing standing between 80 innocent lives and a massacre. He checked his magazine. 12 rounds left. He looked at the captain who was clutching his bleeding shoulder, trying to crawl away. He looked at the mercenaries who were regrouping, realizing one man with a pistol couldn't hold them off forever. Elias took a deep breath. The real fight was just starting. The silence that followed Elias's ultimatum lasted exactly 3 seconds. It was broken not by a gunshot, but by a voice. The man in the grey suit, the one handling the money, the architect of this misery, stepped out from behind the cover of the office stairs. He didn't look terrified anymore. He looked annoyed, like a man whose spreadsheet had just developed an error. He pointed a manicured finger at the container, then at Elias. "There are no witnesses," the suit shouted, his voice cracking with cold authority. "Burn it. Burn it all down. The container, the medic, the captain, everyone." The mercenaries hesitated. Killing armed combatants was one thing. Massacring 80 civilians in a box was another. But money is a powerful motivator, and fear of the employer is often stronger than morality. The mercenary leader, a scarred man with a shaved head, nodded. He signaled his team to flank. "Flashbangs out! Frag the container!" he barked. Elias didn't wait. The moment he heard frag, his mind shifted gears from negotiation to extermination. He couldn't let a grenade get near that open door. He saw the mercenary on the left reach for his belt. Elias leaned out from the heavy steel door of the container, exposing his body to return fire. He steadied his pistol with both hands. Distance, 25 yards. Target, moving. He exhaled. Pop, pop. 2 rounds. The first missed, sparking off the concrete. The second caught the mercenary in the thigh. The man went down, dropping the grenade he was priming. It rolled harmlessly away, pin still in, but the other mercenaries opened fire. The air around Elias erupted. Bullets slammed into the shipping container, the deafening clang of lead on steel ringing like a massive bell. Elias threw himself backward, hitting the corrugated metal floor of the container. Inside, the screaming intensified. The people were scrambling over each other, trying to get to the back of the box, away from the open door. "Get down!" Elias roared, his voice cutting through the panic. "Stay flat on the floor, don't move!" He crawled back to the edge of the door. He was pinned. He couldn't peek out without taking a round to the face. He needed to change the geometry of the fight. He remembered the propane, the forklift. It was still hissing, the gas pooling on the floor in the low spots of the concrete, invisible but deadly. The mercenaries were moving past it, confident now, closing the net. Elias took a breath. He had 10 rounds left. He didn't need to hit a man. He needed to hit a spark. He lay on his stomach, angling his pistol through the gap between the container door and the floor. He couldn't see the targets, but he could see the forklift's tires. He aimed at the concrete floor directly beneath the tank. He fired, once, twice. The second bullet struck the steel rim of the wheel, creating a shower of sparks. Whoomp! The ignition was immediate and violent. It wasn't an explosion like in the movies. It was a rapid expansion of burning gas. A wave of blue and orange fire rolled across the center of the warehouse floor, consuming the oxygen in a terrifying rush. The 2 mercenaries nearest the forklift were knocked off their feet by the heat wave, scrambling backward, batting at their smoking tactical vests. The wall of fire effectively cut the room in half. It was a barrier. It bought him time. "Move!" Elias yelled to himself. He scrambled out of the container, staying low, using the smoke and the distortion of the heat waves as cover. He didn't retreat into the box. He climbed up the side of it. The container had a ladder-rung system on the locking mechanism. He hauled himself up to the roof of the metal box. He was now 10 feet in the air, looking down at the chaos. The fire alarm was blaring now, a high-pitched shriek that added to the disorientation. The sprinklers kicked on. spraying a mist of water that turned the smoke into a thick, choking steam. Visibility dropped to 0 for everyone on the ground floor, but from up high, Elias could see the movement of the dark shapes below. He saw the mercenary leader trying to flank around the fire, moving toward the rear of the container to cut off escape. Elias moved across the roof of the container, his boots silent on the wet metal. He reached the edge just as the leader passed underneath. Elias holstered his gun. He didn't want to miss. He jumped. He dropped 10 feet, landing squarely on the man. The impact drove the air out of the mercenary's lungs with a sickening crunch. They hit the concrete together, rolling in the wet, ash-covered slurry. The mercenary was strong. He recovered fast, throwing an elbow back that caught Elias in the ribs. Elias felt something crack. A rib, maybe 2. The pain was white-hot, but he ignored it. The mercenary spun, drawing a combat knife from his chest rig. He lunged. Elias didn't block. He deflected, slapping the knife arm aside and stepping inside the guard. He slammed a palm strike into the man's chin, snapping his head back, then drove a knee into his midsection. The man doubled over. Elias grabbed the back of his tactical vest and rammed him face first into the side of the container. The man slumped, unconscious. Elias grabbed the man's rifle, an AR-15 platform. He checked the mag. Full. He finally had an equalizer. But the situation was deteriorating. The suit was screaming orders again. "Kill him! He's just one man!" The remaining 3 mercenaries were professional. They stopped rushing. They spread out, taking cover behind the heavy machinery, setting up crossfires. They started suppressing fire. Bullets chewed up the corner of the container where Elias was crouching. He was pinned again. He looked inside the container. The people were terrified, huddled in the wet darkness. A young woman met his eyes. She was holding a baby. She didn't scream. She just looked at him with a pleading intensity that hit him harder than a bullet. "You promised," her eyes said. "You started this. Finish it." Elias gritted his teeth. He turned back to the fight. He needed to draw their fire away from the civilians. He popped up, firing 2 controlled bursts at the muzzle flashes in the mist, then sprinted across the open gap to a stack of pallets. Bullets chased him, chipping the concrete at his heels. He was the rabbit now. He wanted them to look at him, to hunt him. "Over here," he yelled, taunting them. "Come and get it." It worked. The fire concentrated on the pallets. Wood splinters flew like shrapnel. Elias checked his perimeter. The captain. Where was the corrupt captain? He hadn't seen him since the fire started. A sudden movement to his right. Elias spun. The captain had crawled behind the conveyor belt. He was hurt, pale, bleeding from the shoulder, but he had his service weapon in his left hand. He wasn't aiming at Elias. He was aiming at the open door of the container. He wanted to kill the witnesses to save his own skin. It was the act of a coward, a man hollowed out by greed. Elias didn't have time to aim the rifle. He threw it. He physically hurled the rifle at the captain just as the man pulled the trigger. The rifle clattered against the captain's arm, ruining his aim. The shot went wild, pinging off the ceiling. The captain yelped, trying to bring the gun back around. Elias was already there. He closed the distance in a blur of motion. He kicked the gun out of the captain's hand. The captain looked up, eyes wide with terror. "Wait, I can explain. I can cut you a deal." Elias grabbed him by the lapels of his uniform and slammed him against the conveyor belt. "The deal," Elias whispered, his face inches from the captain's, "was that you protect this city. You broke the deal." He didn't kill him. He didn't have to. He struck him once, a precision blow to the temple that turned the lights out. The captain slid to the floor, but the delay had cost him. The last 2 mercenaries had moved up. They had him flanked. Elias turned to see a barrel of a rifle peeking around the corner of a forklift, 10 yards away. He was out in the open. No cover. No time to draw his pistol. He braced himself for the impact. This was it. The cost of doing business. Suddenly, a deafening crash shook the entire building. The main loading bay doors, the massive metal shutters at the front of the warehouse, imploded. They didn't open. They were rammed. A heavy armored truck, black, with SWAT, stenciled on the side in subdued grey, smashed through the metal like it was paper. Debris flew everywhere. The mercenaries spun around, stunned. The truck screeched to a halt, and the back doors flew open. "Federal agents, drop your weapons! Get on the ground!" The voice was amplified, booming. Armored figures poured out of the truck, moving with the precision of a machine. Flashlights cut through the smoke. Red laser sights swept the room. The mercenaries knew the math. 3 against 20 feds? They dropped their rifles instantly, raising their hands. The suit, the man in grey, tried to run toward the back exit. A single shot rang out from a police marksman. It hit the floor right in front of the suit's expensive Italian shoes. He froze, then slowly raised his hands, defeat slumping his shoulders. Elias stood in the middle of the chaos, chest heaving, his hands empty but ready. He watched the feds swarm the room, zip-tying the mercenaries, securing the suit. A team of medics rushed past him toward the container. He watched them enter, saw the flashlights playing over the faces of the people inside. He heard the cries of relief, the sobbing. He took a step back, melting into the shadow of a pillar. He wasn't one of the feds. He wasn't supposed to be here. A tall man in a windbreaker with FBI on the back walked over to where the captain was lying unconscious. He looked at the captain, then looked around the room. He spotted Elias in the shadows. The agent was older, tired-looking. He held up a hand, signaling his team to hold fire. He walked over to Elias, stopping 5 feet away. He looked at the unconscious captain, the neutralized mercenaries, the saved civilians. Then he looked at Elias. "You're the one," the agent said quietly. "The old man, he called my office 3 days ago, said he had an insurance policy, said if he didn't make it, he'd find someone who could." Elias didn't say anything. He just reached into his jacket pocket. The envelope, the one the old man had died to protect. It was stained with sweat and grime, but the seal was unbroken. Elias handed it to the agent. "This is the rest of it," Elias said, his voice raspy from the smoke. "Bank accounts, names, the whole network." The agent took the envelope. He weighed it in his hand. He looked at Elias with a mixture of respect and professional wariness. "You know I can't just let you walk out of here. You assaulted a police officer. You discharged a weapon." Elias looked at the agent. He looked at the container where the medics were carrying a child out to an ambulance. "I didn't start this," Elias said. "I just finished it." The agent looked at the envelope again, then at the chaos of the scene. He looked back at the main bay doors where the smoke was drifting out into the night. He sighed. He turned his back to Elias, pretending to examine the captain's injuries. "I have to secure the scene," the agent said loudly, to no one in particular. "It's going to take me about 2 minutes to brief my team. The back exit is unguarded. It would be a shame if the suspect slipped away in the confusion." He didn't look back. It was a gift, a professional courtesy. Elias didn't waste it. He turned and moved silently toward the rear of the warehouse. He slipped through the broken service door and out into the cold night air. The fog was still thick. The sirens were everywhere now, a symphony of red and blue lights flashing against the low clouds. Elias walked away from the lights. He walked back toward the river, into the darkness of the alleyways. He felt the pain in his ribs now, sharp and biting. His hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline crash. He checked his watch. 04:22. The sun would be up in 2 hours. The city was waking up, oblivious to the war that had just been fought in its gut. Elias adjusted his bag on his shoulder. He was tired. God, he was tired. But as he walked, he felt something else. Lighter. The weight the old man had put on him was gone, transferred to people who could carry it in the daylight. But the memory of it, the feeling of the envelope, the look in the young woman's eyes, that stayed. He reached the main street. He blended into the early morning foot traffic of shift workers. He was just a face in the crowd again, just a man walking home. But as the narrator's voice would say, he wasn't the same man who entered that alley. He had crossed a line, and he knew deep down that the city had plenty of dark corners left. And now, the darkness knew his name.